Good morning, Mr. Ranscht. Feel free to take a seat, and you can start your remarks whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to all of the commissioners. You've seen me before. I applied for the last vacancy on this court almost a year ago. Since that time, I've kept doing a lot of appellate work. Last fall, my number of appellate matters was in the 30s. It's in the 40s now. I've argued 4 appeals between then and now, 3 here in this courtroom at the Iowa Supreme Court and 1 at the Court of Appeals. The subjects range from labor law to gambling to police chases to the Iowa Constitution. Pretty disparate subjects, but this frequent and recent appellate practice in broadly varied areas lends itself well, I think, to the Court of Appeals, where judges must regularly learn about and write about areas of the law that are new to them. Beyond those 4 recent arguments, I have 5 more that are in progress. Some of them began before last fall, and they're still working their way through the process. Others were newly appealed since then, but all of those as well speak to my willingness and indeed my eagerness to continue working on and participating in appeals, and in turn, my ability to transition to the appellate bench where appeals are every day. Even some of the work I do in the district court is still an appeal. Petitions for judicial review of administrative agency action. Look, I know we just got off a break, but I don't want to put you to sleep already, but here we are. Involve the district court sitting in an appellate capacity. The agency whose action is challenged could be Health and Human Services, could be the Racing and Gaming Commission, could be the Department of Education, could be a professional licensing board, all of whom I've handled matters for, by the way, could be something else entirely. But my experience in administrative law here adds even more to my appellate experience and qualifications. And what it adds is adaptability. The varied issues I address and the cases I handle in my position mean that I've become adept at learning about new subjects quickly and then writing about them competently and succinctly soon afterward. And it also demonstrates that I know how to manage and handle a large, high-volume caseload while consistently producing high-quality output and work. That's another quality that a good Court of Appeals judge should have. Now, you probably want to know a little bit about me that isn't just numbers and brass tacks. So I'm originally from Wisconsin. I studied music in undergrad. Maybe I'm at 2 strikes here and this is strike 3, but I also used to be a bartender. Wisconsin will always feel like home to me when I go back to visit, but I'm an Iowan now. I'm married to a native Iowan. We live in Ankeny with our little cuddly dog. He's probably on her lap watching this at home right now, or else snoring obliviously in his dog bed, but we love him either way. And I'm proud to be an Iowan. I've been fortunate both to experience and to serve our judicial system throughout my legal training and my career as an intern at various places during law school, as a law clerk to an esteemed Iowa Supreme Court justice, now as a practicing lawyer in the Iowa Attorney General's office for almost the last 7 years. Serving on the Court of Appeals would be the next step in continuing, yes, that public service as a step I would be thrilled to take. What you should take from my application is this. I do appellate work enthusiastically, I do it regularly, and I do it well. My significant experience of over 40 appellate matters in a diverse range of subjects in a relatively short time prepares me well to join the esteemed Court of Appeals bench. So I would be honored to receive your nomination, and I'm happy to answer any questions you commissioners have.
Thank you. We'll start with Commissioner Graber.
Thank you for your application and being here today. You obviously have experience on appellate work. You talked a lot about that today. Is it something that you find that you are just in that place in your career with the appellate work, or is this truly something that you love doing, and explain why?
It's the latter. And the way I would explain it is everyone in their life, whether it's a career-related thing, whether it's discovering a band that they had never heard about but absolutely love their music, whether it's a new restaurant that you hadn't heard of but you went there and now you go there every week. When I got to start doing appellate work, and I think most notably was when I began an internship at the Iowa Supreme Court, it was kind of a eureka moment. It was like, this is the most fun. I want to keep doing this. So that's why I was eager then to get a postgraduate clerkship. That's why I applied in the Attorney General's office, because as a clerk, I saw them here in this courtroom, fantastic lawyers arguing regularly. I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to keep doing appeals. And in my practice, I've also volunteered to take some appeals that wouldn't otherwise be assigned to me, just because, as you asked, Commissioner, I do love it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Chase?
Thank you. If we're looking for someone who is going to be reviewing district court cases, how do you respond to the fact that your work has been appellate work and not review, not any trial work, not any private practice? And if I'm right, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. My understanding is no trial work at the district court level.
Not quite correct.
Okay.
I have had a jury trial, and that in fact overlapped with the application period for the last vacancy, but I applied nevertheless. I also do work in the district court in litigating cases up to and toward trial. I don't mean this in an arrogant way, but I'm a defense lawyer, so most of the time if I don't get to trial, that means I did a good job. It means I found a legal issue on a motion to dismiss or on a motion for summary judgment that convinced the court that a trial was not necessary. And so I don't think it's a disadvantage necessarily that I don't get all the way to trial as often as I participate in and handle appeals. But nevertheless, I do still have experience in that kind of, I have many administrative hearings in front of administrative law judges, which are similarly fact-finding in that way. And regardless, I also think it's valuable for an appellate court to have a mix of perspectives. And the way I would describe it is I've spent a lot of my career looking top-down from the appellate perspective. I think it's fair to say, dabbled in trying cases and looking from that trial court up perspective. But the whole point of an appellate bench is to have a mix. There are people on the bench that have that trial court background, and so I don't think it would be a problem to have someone like me join them.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pearson?
No question.
Commissioner Marquardt?
Thank you for your application. I don't have any questions at this time.
Commissioner Henderson?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Parrish?
I want to follow up on Commissioner Chase's question and also couple it with another factor. And that is, I want you to talk about your collegiality along with the fact that you have not had a hands-on client. It's not to say that the clients you have are not hands-on, but I want you to address that. And do you think your collegiality was developed or through the colleagues you work with? Can you explain that to the commission a little bit, how you gained that? Because that's an important aspect of the Court of Appeals.
Right. I'm glad that you said
That's a three-part
That's a
question.
three-part question, and I'm glad that you said that. It's not that I don't have clients. I do have clients, and yeah, sometimes they can be hands-on, but it's easy to fall into representing the state and state agencies a lot of the time that it's faceless. But it's not. I'm one of them sometimes, and I have to be in front of the court. But the officers and employees of the state work very hard, and it's just as distressing to them sometimes when they get sued, even in their official capacity, as it is for people who don't work in the government. But in terms of the other part of your question about developing collegiality, yeah, I think it is a big factor is who you work with. And one story I'll tell, I don't know if any of them are watching, but for a time in the Attorney General's office, in my specific division, we had a bunch of us who had music backgrounds. I was a drummer, we had a vocalist, we had a pianist, we had a guitarist. We didn't get together like as a band and jam or anything, but we all enjoyed making music together, and we kind of deployed it strategically. We would do it on a milestone birthday for a fellow colleague, or we'd do it at a retirement gathering for someone else. And it just shows the value of appreciating one another. I will remember the tears we saw in someone's eyes as we just made kind of parody lyrics to an existing song with their name, but sang it to them on their last day of work. I value the colleagues I work with. That's a real big strength of the Attorney General's office. It has been, and I'm able to adapt that, I think, wherever I go.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hoig,
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Hoytink.
Two quick comments and a question. So first, I'm glad you weren't in any of my law school classes because it looks like you got a top award for 7, including negotiable instruments, which is
Which who
something-
uses anymore?
Correct. And also, just I really appreciate your clerkship with Justice Hecht. I hope that frames whatever temperament that you would bring to any role whatsoever. As you work in a large, I'm going to call it a law firm, the AG's office, there are several different types of lawyers there. There are trial specialists, there are more appellate specialists. Maybe you've done a little bit of both. Can you talk about what being an appellate specialist, how has that, what's that bring if you want to be an appellate court judge versus necessarily being a trial court specialist? What skill set do you think maybe is different that you can bring based on your appellate experience?
So the appellate writing, I mentioned it has to be succinct, right? But it also has to be thorough. And so what an appellate specialist brings is maybe the ability to expand a little more on some concepts, because an appellate opinion can be a teaching opinion just as well. It's a frequently stated maxim that the judicial branch is the only branch that has to explain its decisions very well. But I take that seriously, and I take it seriously explaining the reasoning and the arguments we make on appeal in every case. I want to be thorough, and I want to make sure nothing's left unturned. In terms of what else being an appellate specialist brings, it is kind of this just more global awareness. I mean, like I think I joked in a meeting with one of you that I try not to schedule anything for 8:30 on Fridays or 10 o'clock on Wednesdays, because that's when appellate decisions are released and I want to read them. So I try to stay up on those, and it's important to me to do that. And that's a good skill that a Court of Appeals judge needs to have, because you're always going to be applying the latest case.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schnur.
Thank you for your application. In your application, you mentioned that your entire practice has been as a government lawyer. Do you see that presenting some challenges to you if you were to go on the Court of Appeals? And if so, what would those challenges be, and how would you address them?
I don't think it's a challenge so much as just a fact. Everyone on the court and every applicant before you today brings their own strengths. I think that the amount of litigation and amount of appeals that involve the government usually involve pretty weighty subjects, and they are important for setting the standards for our government to operate under going forward. So rather than it being a challenge, I think it could actually be a strength, my familiarity with the structure and workings and the processes available in the state government. One example I'll give, I've had no involvement with it whatsoever, but you probably have seen it in the news. There's a proposal for a carbon pipeline that presents many legal issues and all flows through a state agency that must hold hearings and do things correctly. So I say it is a strength because something like that is very important to a lot of Iowans, deserves a resolution, and I having had experience in a lot of related areas, will know as a Court of Appeals judge, should that reach me, whether everything has happened as it should.
Thank you.
Commissioner Roberts.
Sort of pick up on, I think, Al's question about sort of spending time with clients, and I think there's maybe an impression if you're in the AG's office, you don't really have a chance to develop like empathy for a client, or quote unquote hold the hand of a client. But it sounds like you think that you have had those experiences. Do you care to share sort of any illustrations of maybe how you've experienced that? If not, not a big deal, but maybe, of course, like without sharing confidential info, but whatever
Right,
you're comfortable
right.
sharing.
So I mentioned, people can be sued even in their official capacity. When they do, like that shows up on a lien search on their house, right? It's a potential judgment lien, and that's upsetting for people. I've even represented a colleague in the Attorney General's office who was sued by a disgruntled person that had a matter with their agency and then sued the agency and the lawyer and someone in the Attorney General's office. And I really take away that that's an interesting experience then to be named as a defendant. Not one, fortunately, that I've had to be personally named as a defendant, but I know the toll it takes, and I've walked people through that. It may seem like less of a big deal because it's just official capacity, but it's still a case that's out there. It gets reported on, and people need the assurances that you're standing up for them. I do that.
Commissioner Sommelroth,
I have no questions.
Thank you.
Commissioner Picklap,
Nothing, thanks.
Commissioner Stanger.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks so much for your application. It's good to see you again. You mentioned in your remarks about a mix on the court and how it's important to have a variety of, areas. I have some concerns that the governor just appointed another member from the Attorney General to the court, and I understand he's conflicted out of some cases, as well as Judge Tabor is from the Attorney General's office. Can you comment to the commission on how your strength of coming from the Attorney General's won't actually be a negative, considering there's already others that are on the court?
Sure. Well, both Judge Tabor and Judge Buller were primarily criminal practitioners in the Criminal Appeals Division of the Attorney General's office. And so the fact that there are a lot of criminal appeals is what's driving perhaps maybe a significant number of recusals from them. While, yes, we're colleagues in the Attorney General's office, I have nothing to do with criminal appeals. I'm in the civil arena almost exclusively. I delve into juvenile law and criminal law when my representation of the state public defender and its employees comes into play. But I think viewing the Attorney General's office as all the same is just a little overbroad. The fact that 2 judges on there on the court right now have been appointed out of the Attorney General's office, I don't think should preclude a third, especially given the difference in subject matter and, at least with respect to Judge Tabor, the passage of time.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hanson,
No questions.
Commissioner Spies.
I wanted to echo what Mr. Hoiting said about your work with Darrell Hecht. He certainly was the cream of the crop and no better example of a good justice. I wanted to ask you briefly something we discussed in my office, and that's how you see the role of technology creeping into the appellate cases that are becoming before the court in the days ahead.
Sure, I think it's going to increase. In fact, I just, before walking over here, got an email invitation to a webinar on the use of AI, perhaps for judges in sentencing, perhaps the use of AI for banks in making loan decisions, and that generates for me a question whether that's potentially discriminatory or has embedded bias by the programmers of the AI. And I think as these technological issues continue to grow and become important in the judicial system and in our cases, having someone like me who's grown up with technology can be a real asset. Now, I heard one of the other applicants today talk about being kind of one of the young judges, and so others come to them for tech support. I am older than Judge Buller, so I will ask him probably for help when I have it. But jokes aside, I think it can be a strength to have someone with significant experience, but who is a little younger, in a younger generation, who has more familiarity with technology and can really approach these issues with ease.
be assured, I took no offense at the reference to age.
I appreciate it.
And I see our time is up.
All
So
right.
we appreciate your application and we wish you the best.
Thank you all.